Approaching April 1st, I eagerly awaited a prank from my husband Lester. Over the years, our history as pranksters had seen an annual increase in the severity of our jokes. The streak of mischief began with me one warm day when Les and I went out. Despite wearing a buttoned-up jacket, I claimed to feel a chill as we strolled through the mall. Suddenly, I removed my jacket to reveal a t-shirt with the words, "I am with stupid," complete with an arrow pointing sideways, standing right next to me. He couldn't initially discern what was on my t-shirt, only noticing the amused reactions of passers-by. It took him a while to realize that every time I shifted position, it was to ensure the arrow on my t-shirt was pointing at him. His face turned crimson, and thus commenced our official prank war. Then came the year when I received an official-looking email, supposedly from the local health department, claiming I had been listed as a lovemaking contact of an Anthony Sanders and instructing me to undergo immediate testing. What I hadn't anticipated was the CC line, including everyone in my office, suggesting they had received the same alarming message. Most of them knew Anthony as an old college boyfriend, oblivious to the fact that I hadn't seen him in over a year, let alone been involved lovingly. Lester, you got me good. Last year I edited a photo, replacing my husband's average-sized member with a comically tiny one and sent it around his office. Truth be told, he's actually above average in that department. He was furious, spending 2 nights away before even considering coming home. No matter how much I apologized, I ended up resorting to an offer of 3 specific favors just to coax him back. 3 bed acts he couldn't refuse. Once home and appeased, he claimed our pranks had spiraled out of control, vowing never to retaliate or prank me again. His promise seemed sincere, but I didn't buy it. I could almost see the gears turning in his head, plotting his revenge. I was certain this year would showcase the darkest corners of his devious mind. I waited, a mix of anticipation and dread. I went to extremes, eavesdropping on his calls, planting a recorder in his car, even scrutinizing our finances for anything suspicious. I was determined not to fall for his prank this time. Yet, my snooping turned up nothing incriminating. He was far cleverer than I had given him credit for. As March passed, Lester appeared unchanged at home while I scrutinized his every move. From midnight on March 31st, I was on high alert. But nothing occurred right after midnight, leaving me on edge. There were still 19 hours for him to spring his plan. I swore to be prepared for whatever he had up his sleeve. The following morning, April 1st, when I descended to the kitchen, he casually offered to whip up breakfast, a rare gesture that immediately raised a red flag. There was no chance I'd consume anything he prepared. I claimed I was in the mood for just cereal. That morning, while pouring myself a bowl and adding milk, I discreetly sniffed it, on the lookout for any added substances. Nothing. A tentative taste confirmed its normalcy. I stubbornly skipped the coffee, citing a reduction in my caffeine intake. Truthfully, I avoided it because he made it. I observed him preparing his beloved ham, egg, and cheese English muffin, almost tempted to ask for one despite the risk. Post-breakfast, we both got ready for work. Amidst checking my toothpaste for tampering and ensuring my cologne retained its usual fragrance, not skunk odor, everything appeared normal except for my sore anxiety. I inspected my car for any suspicious devices, wishing for one of those border-crossing mirrors on a stick to scrutinize beneath. It all seemed regular, yet my heart drummed loudly when I started the engine. Testing the brakes unnecessarily, I scolded myself Lester wouldn't resort to anything physically damaging. I repeated that to reassure myself, but doubt lingered. He was seriously upset about my last prank at work. My enthusiastic best friend Marta eagerly greeted me and expressed her curiosity about Lester's antics the previous night. I had confided in Marta about my concerns regarding Lester's impending April Fool's trick. Recalling her support for my prank from the previous year, she jokingly requested an unaltered version of the photo, or even better, a private viewing in our bedroom. I noted her eagerness for some excitement in her life. I shared with Marta that Lester had been relatively quiet, but I was convinced he was plotting something. I could sense it in the air at night. Marta playfully commented on her love for slipping song lyrics into conversations, prompting a chuckle from me. I believe he's prolonging my suspense just to push me over the edge. Well, he doesn't have far to go right now. But mark my words, whatever he pulls, I won't fall for it. He may be the prince of pranks, but I am the queen of jokes. We laughed, and then I finally indulged in my much-delayed morning coffee. I checked my desk for unexpected surprises and went about my work relatively normally, though occasional thoughts of what might await me later lingered. The first time my desk phone rang, I practically leaped out of my chair, chuckling at my own Hayden nerves. Nothing out of the ordinary happened for the rest of the day. I half expected a delivery of risque items that would accidentally be revealed in front of my colleagues, but thankfully, nothing of the sort occurred. As the workday's end neared, my anxiety skyrocketed. At 5, I hit the road, nearly missing the red light. As my mind fixated on what awaited me at home, I gave myself a light slap to refocus on driving safely. Upon arriving home, I started preparing dinner. Lester arrived at his usual time, appearing completely drained. I suspected it was an act, anticipating more theatrics from him soon. I asked if he had a tough day, dealing with too many graduates struggling with basic math. Lester responded that my remark hit too close to home to be funny. He explained that his mood wasn't due to a challenging day, but rather an exasperating one. The quarterly report deadline had kept him occupied with mundane details and figure cross-checking. Usually done before lunch, today's struggle to reconcile two totals that were supposed to match took an extra 4 hours. He even missed lunch and considered calling to say he'd be late for dinner. Fortunately, he caught the error, wrapped up the report before clocking out, and expressed being absolutely famished. He hoped dinner was on its way within 20 minutes. I suggested he fix himself a drink while I finished up, to which he responded positively, appreciating the idea. Lester leaned in, planting a kiss on my cheek before heading to the cupboard where we stored the liquor. He grabbed the bourbon and mixed himself a drink before settling in the living room, tuning in to reruns of Swamp People. It was comical to think he'd ever venture into a place teeming with mosquitoes, alligators, and snakes. I suspected he had a soft spot for people with Cajun accents. During dinner, I attempted to strike up a conversation, but my focus was primarily on uncovering the impending prank. Eventually, I probed, asking if Lester had anything planned for the night. He responded, stating that he had nothing planned after the debacle with the quarterly report. He emphasized that he didn't even consider bringing work home and expressed his desire to unwind with me by his side. Playfully teasing, he mentioned that since his favorite girl wasn't there, I would have to do. I nudged him in response. After dinner, as I filled the dishwasher with the dishes, I suggested watching a movie and snacking on some popcorn. Lester showed interest, and after preparing the popcorn in the microwave, I brought it in a big bowl to the living room, along with our usual drinks to relax. I asked Lester what he wanted to watch, mentioning that while I typically preferred movies with closeness and roughness, I was open to his choice for the night. I suggested Roadhouse, noting its blend of romance, nudity, and violence, not to mention Patrick Swayze's physique. Lester chuckled in response. Sounds good to me. I haven't seen that in a while. I love the part when the stuffed polar bear falls on the stug. Was it a polar bear or a regular bear? I thought it was a polar bear, but we can see. We were watching the movie and eating popcorn. I had a couple of rum and cokes to Lester's, bourbons, and Owl. I was finally beginning to relax and let down my guard. Suddenly the doorbell rang, and my internal alarm went off. This is it, I told myself immediately. No one comes to our house unannounced after dark. I immediately put my mind on DEFCON 1 alert status and was ready to spoil whatever dirty trick he had devised. Lester, of course, venously denied knowing who it might be. Yeah, right. I went to the door and opened it up. I was surprised to see there was a guy, not just an average man, but a huge biker guy at the door. 2 others were on their bikes in the driveway. I shook my head in disbelief. I thought that Lester, this is going to be good. I greeted the scared, tattooed biker with a knowing smile, expressing my awareness of the situation. I apologized for disturbing him and asked if this was where the party was. Responding affirmatively, I slung my arm around his waist, leading him to the center of the living room. Noticing his firm abs and bulging biceps, my husband, seeing me with this stranger, leaped off the couch, bewildered. He questioned who the stranger was, and I played along, stating that he was here to fulfill my fantasy. My husband realized it was an April Fool's joke and expressed his initial confusion. I acknowledged the prank and continued with the act, telling the stranger, whom my husband referred to as Paul, that his prank was over and he could leave. The stranger, calling himself the bandit, insisted on staying, and I affirmed that I wanted him to stay. I turned to the bandit, planting an exaggerated kiss on him, much to my husband's dismay. Lester rushed over, and the bandit grabbed him by the throat, making him stumble and choke. Chuckling, the bandit pulled me close, caressing my backside while kissing me. I reciprocated, sensing his arousal. Lester charged again, and the bandit knocked him down with a single punch. Addressing me, the bandit asked if he should handle Lester or if he should stay and watch. I chose to let Lester watch, stating that it would teach him not to mess with me. The bandit agreed and stepped outside to inform the others. Inside, one of the men scanned the room and questioned what was happening, noting that it didn't resemble a party. I explained that the lady, referring to myself, wanted to be involved with bikers before heading to the actual party. Commenting on my assets, they discussed their plans, with one expressing the intention to take my rear first. They noticed Lester on the floor and learned he was my husband, whom I wanted to watch. I suggested tying him to a chair and taping his mouth, offering the materials from the garage. Lester protested, declaring that regardless of the situation being a joke or not, it marked the end of our marriage. I responded, accusing him of setting it up and now being upset because I wasn't playing along as he intended. As Lester lunged again, the bikers subdued him and convincingly pinned him to the chair. I wondered if their coordination was rehearsed. The bikers inquired about getting the party started and asked about drinks. I directed them to the liquor cabinet and the fridge for a couple of beers. Bandit turned to me, asking how I wanted to start and how far Lester had suggested they go. I responded, asking Bandit about Lester's instructions, and he looked puzzled. He mentioned I could go all the way however I wanted. In a referenced version, he did it right. If we're going through with this, I could use some help setting the mood. Got anything stronger than liquor? Absolutely. I always carry something. He fetched something intriguing from his bike. A sip later, I found myself swapping kisses with all three of them, smirking at Lester, who seemed to struggle to break free. Approaching me, the bandit declared, "Time to dance, darling," tearing off my dress and swiftly losing my underwear. Soon he was bare, as were his companions. Panic started to grip me. I hadn't anticipated Les would allow things to escalate like this. I shouted to Lester, "Consider this a lesson if you try to outsmart me engaging with his friend." But when I sensed his imminent climax, I attempted to pull away. "Too bad your pleasure isn't our concern. Your job is to satisfy us," they retorted. The following hour felt unreal, despite my objections and resistance in the midst of this chaotic group. At the end of it all, anger boiled within me towards Lester for orchestrating this and then allowing these men to subject me to such things. Each time I glanced at Lester in the chair, rage surged. Yet I masked my distress. I wanted him to believe I relished it, but I couldn't let him think his prank succeeded. After a couple of hours, the bikers departed. My movements were labored, but I managed to reach the kitchen and grab a sharp knife. When I went to release Lester, I discovered his wrists and ankles were injured. His ankles were bleeding, the ropes having torn into his skin. That seemed to have helped him. Certainly I anticipated his explosion, maybe even a physical outburst once the ropes and duct tape were finally off. Standing there, I glittered at him, ready for his expected fury. But instead of a verbal or physical reaction, he looked at me with silent rage, shoved me aside, and ascended the stairs. I retreated to the downstairs bathroom to cleanse the remnants of the bikers from my skin, noticing numerous hickeys scattered across various parts of my body. I remained in the bathroom when the front door slammed shut. Moments later, the screech of Lester's car signaled his departure. I assumed he'd sulk in a motel, a pattern he'd shown before. I silently celebrated my victory in the annual April Fool's prank and retired to bed. Saturday morning arrived, and my phone buzzed incessantly. It was Marta, asking me to spill the details about what Lester had done. I responded, saying he wouldn't believe it and suggested meeting for lunch at Fridays. Marta agreed, urging me not to tease. At TGIF, we indulged in our meal, and I recounted the actual biker encounter that was meant to be a sham, along with Lester's furious reaction. Marta expressed disbelief that I was involved in that, especially considering Lester had set me up for it. Playfully switching to a terrible Southern accent, she pretended to swoon, and I chuckled. I explained how Lester had tried to deceive me with a prank involving facing a biker, only to shout April Fools afterward. I shared that I had outplayed his prank by turning it into a real event. Although I hadn't planned to go that far, it worked in a strange way. I doubted Lester would ever try something like that again. Marta questioned whether I was positive Lester had set it up, expressing disbelief that he would orchestrate something so extreme. The possibility of a messy divorce was raised, and there was a suggestion to get rid of any video, with a cheeky request for a copy. While I dismissed Marta's last remark, her earlier words triggered a troubling thought. What if it wasn't a setup? The idea of a potential divorce weighed heavily on me, a dire possibility I was hesitant to consider. It felt like I might have shattered my marriage, but swiftly I pushed the thought away. Convinced it had to be a setup, that's what I stuck to, reassuring myself and trying to believe it. Then a realization struck me, prompting a question about the last time a biker showed up at my door looking for a party. I wished it were true, and Marta acknowledged the possibility that I was right. The focus shifted to Lester's whereabouts, speculating that he might be sulking in some motel, furious that I had outplayed his prank. Just then, my phone buzzed, and I told Marta to hold on, thinking it might be Lester. However, disappointment washed over me as I realized it wasn't him, but an unfamiliar number. Upon answering the call, a voice I didn't recognize asked if I was Carrie Lynch. Inwardly groaning, I assumed it was a telemarketer and preemptively declined any offers. When the caller identified themselves as the police and mentioned injuries sustained by my husband, I dismissed it as another part of Lester's failed prank. Despite the assurance from the caller, claiming to be a detective named Fredericks, that they had checked my house and spoken to Lester, I doubted the legitimacy of the situation. Refusing to play along, I told the supposed detective that I would be home in an hour, or whenever I pleased. If he wanted to talk, he could come by later. I ended the call abruptly. Marta expressed concern about the police calling me and suggested I should go see Lester. I shared my skepticism, unsure if the caller was genuinely a detective or just another one of Lester's ploys. Convinced that Lester was taking the joke too far, I expressed a desire not to dwell on it and proposed getting dessert, specifically craving chocolate. I arrived home post-lunch to find Lester absent, which wasn't unexpected. Just as I'd started to remove my jacket and hang it up, the doorbell interrupted. Letting out a heavy sigh, I made my way to the door. A female police officer and a man who seemed to be a detective stood there, flashing badges and requesting entry. The shock hit me. It was real, entirely unlike what I had anticipated. Doubts crept in. Perhaps they weren't really law enforcement. I'd asked to see their identification. They presented badges, Idaho cards, driver's licenses, and business cards. Everything checked out. Apologizing for my initial skepticism, I welcomed them in. That's when I remembered I hadn't tidied up from the previous night. The living room remained untouched since I'd gone to bed, displaying empty beer and liquor bottles, stains on the couch and rug, and of course the chair. The detective focused on the chair where Lester had been bound, noting the cut ropes, used duct tape, and blood stains. I hadn't realized there was so much blood. The detective asked if this was where my husband was tied up, and I confirmed, adding that it was a bit more complicated. When asked about the complexity, I explained that my husband had orchestrated an ill-conceived April Fool's joke to make me think a biker gang would attack me. I turned the tables on him, making him believe I wanted something that made him uncomfortable. He got angry and stormed off when I freed him. When questioned about who initially tied him up, I mentioned a biker named Bandit and a couple of others. The detective shared that they had already spoken to Bandit, who was cooperating for a more lenient sentence. According to Bandit, I had invited them for a party, requested medications, and engaged in consensual activities. He alleged that I instructed him to tie up my husband to watch the event, claiming it was our shared interest. The detective needed to know if this was true or if they should pursue exploit charges against Bandit as well. I attempted to stop it, but my efforts were in vain. I was trying to teach my husband a lesson in response to the mess he created, and I just went along with it. I hoped the detective could understand. Tears interrupted my words, and I paused before asking about Lester's condition and whether he was still at the ER. The detective explained that Lester was more angry than anything else. His wrists and ankles were bandaged and sore as expected. Lester had been discharged after a couple of hours, but came to the police station to press charges. The doctor anticipated a physical recovery. Expressing relief that Lester wasn't seriously hurt, I acknowledged that it was his fault, and I didn't want to be made a fool of. The detective commented that I handled it effectively, but reminded me that they were not the judge of fault. Judges and juries would determine that soon. Suddenly, the detective stated that they were arresting me for assault and wrongful confinement of my husband. Additionally, they advised me to get checked for STDs, as one of the bikers I was with had a severe and persistent STD. The detective informed me of my right to an attorney. In a plea for understanding, I explained that it was meant to be a prank on me, and I retaliated. I protested against the arrest, arguing that it was Lester's fault, but the detective insisted that I should tell that to the judge. Subsequently, I found myself in jail, attempting to post bail. However, I discovered that my cards had been canceled. Despite the humiliation, I called my father and fabricated a story until he revealed that Lester had already contacted him. My father, who was close to Lester, berated me for minutes while I sobbed. Eventually, he agreed to bail me out and take me home. Upon arriving home, I sent a text to Lester, pleading for a discussion. To clarify things, his reply was cold. "Everything is clear to me. My response is coming soon. I hope for a face-to-face, or at least a call." Instead, I received divorce papers citing physical exploit and emotional torment. I cried once more. I had allowed a foolish prank to ruin my marriage, an impractical joke to say the least. The trial progressed swiftly. Bandit took the stand as the primary witness. His testimony detailed arriving at the wrong address, being invited by me and others to a party, tying up my husband at my behest, and engaging in consensual relations with me. In exchange for testifying against me, he received a minor sentence for the confinement charge. However, it was my husband's testimony that cut the deepest. He admitted to our history of pranks but insisted he had vowed never to deceive me again. He believed I trusted him. The events of that night shook him to the core, shocking him to an unfathomable degree. Under oath, Lester denied any prior contact with Bandit, any consent to a pretend or real foursome involving his wife, and declared that his love and respect for me vanished that night. Displaying the scars on his wrists and ankles, he mentioned they were a lasting reminder of why he could never trust me again. His admission that he might struggle to trust any woman caused tears, even among some female jurors. My case crumbled when it was my turn to testify. Tearfully narrating my version, I sensed the jury's disapproval, especially from the female members I had hoped to sway. Guilt weighed on me, evident to all, and unsurprisingly, the verdict was guilty. I received a 3 to 5 year sentence, a leniency that could have been harsher. Back in county jail, I awaited transfer to prison when space became available. The final divorce papers arrived during my incarceration, but I barely acknowledged the settlement. One day, Lester visited, and I was puzzled by his presence. He sarcastically remarked that the prison suits me. I acknowledged that I deserved the sarcasm and expressed regret for what I did to him, even if he didn't orchestrate it. Lester responded, stating it was too little, too late, and that he still believed I set him up. He presented a hypothetical scenario, suggesting a twisted motive on his part to orchestrate a divorce with the best terms, a slicker than 50-50 split. He detailed a cunning plan involving squirreling away cash, bribing bikers, deceiving cops, and taking a minor sentence. He mentioned the need for ties to a gang, hinting at someone at work whose brother needed his approval for a promotion. Lester expressed his shock when I took the situation to a level he hadn't anticipated, and he claimed that seeing me enjoy it crushed him. Despite feeling torn between wanting to end both of us, he opted to put me behind bars. Acknowledging his correctness, Lester stated that we were both fools in the mess, but I was the one behind bars. He questioned who the bigger fool was.